I've watched basketball. I haven't just covered basketball for more than the last quarter century. I've watched it practically all of my life. And when it comes to MJ compared to LeBron, I just think there's levels. And I think that a lot of times people are looking at numbers and stuff. Well, MJ played 3 years in college. LeBron never went to college. MJ played in an era that was far more physical than is allowed now. The Jordan rules that were implemented by the bad boy Pistons and stuff like that, LeBron didn't have to go through any of that. And, you know, even though I hate using the word choke because I don't feel that way about LeBron. I think he's number 2 all time. I think he's a phenomenal leader and a phenomenal player and all of that other stuff. But I can't escape what I saw happen against Dallas. That has never been on Michael Jordan's resume. I'm not even talking about a finals loss, which never happened. I'm talking about anybody saying such things. And then you take into account just the mental makeup. LeBron James, for so many years, playing around, ingratiating himself with folks, not really creating an environment of animus and vitriol where you're going at one another and everybody knows it and this is what it is, you know. And so I think about things like that in terms of the kind of mood and tempo you set in order to engage in competition. And that, to me, is what's missing. So when I think about MJ over LeBron, it's not just the titles. It's not just his unblemished record in the NBA Finals. It's the way he embraced challenges. And Max, I know I told you one story, and you brought that up about, you know, MJ really setting the competition right. But there were other things, like somebody would say something and a reporter would go to MJ during a press conference and say, well, this player said this or whatever, and Jordan wouldn't say anything. And then he'd get up and he'd leave the press conference. And then he'd peek his head back into the media room with us. And they said, what, who said that? You see what I'm saying? Just so we'd all know, like, who said that about me? Okay. You know what I'm saying? And then he'd leave and you knew. And the headlines let you know, Jordan's coming for this dude. That's the kind of stuff that LeBron has never given us, and that's the kind of stuff that contributes to the allure that allows someone to be labeled the GOAT. And that's where I'm at with it.
See, to me, what your argument is like, look, this is the way I think about who the greatest is, and LeBron can't overtake Jordan. The problem for me is I think a lot of young people now think, oh, any old-timer who says MJ, they just grew up with him. They have this, like, irrational attachment to him. You know, if you idolize whoever you come up watching, and they almost have a religious devotion to him. What I mean by religious devotion is it means an undisprovable hypothesis. Meaning no matter what you say, you can't talk me out of this. I believe this. This is based in feeling and faith and emotion. Belief. That's not me with Jordan. I want to be very clear to people who support LeBron as the greatest player ever. No. I have a rational approach to this. And rationally, Michael Jordan's the greatest player who ever lived. Like, I'm sorry to hurt the feelings of kids who came up watching LeBron, because I know when your eyes are on LeBron, you're like, how could anyone ever have been better than this? There was a guy who was even better than this. His peak was better than this. Value over career, that's another story. LeBron's longevity can't be touched. But at their very best, Jordan's the greatest player of all time. Which is why I was glad when you said, Stephen A., a couple weeks ago, and you did the whole thing, I don't know, if LeBron gets through the Western Conference and beats the big three on the Nets and they're healthy, we might have to have that conversation. The reason I was glad about that, even if you don't think that we have to have that conversation or change our minds, is because I do think we have to have that conversation. If LeBron goes, as Barkley said, on the road in the Western Conference as a play-in, beats the entire Western Conference, and then comes out of the West and faces a healthy Nets big three, let's say, who hasn't even been to a Game 7 yet, something like that, and LeBron beats them too? No, my ranking Jordan 1 is not some religious devotion to Jordan. It's rational. In other words, everybody, in fact, Jordan is the greatest player of all time. But if LeBron does that, then in fact, we better have a new conversation, because maybe LeBron will have caught him. We have to see how it unfolds. To me, it's evidence-based. And if LeBron produces that level of evidence, new conversation.
As usual, I think your comment is uppity and bushy, because who's to say that other people's position isn't about evidence? I don't believe this is some religious devotion to Jordan. I believe that I'm going on evidence, and I'm going on the eye test as well. It's not just numbers. It's not just championships. It's not just what I saw him do. It's who I saw him do it against. Those things are relevant to me. And so when I look at it from that perspective and I think about a LeBron and I think about the eye test, watching these guys perform, I also think about the conditions under which you perform. When I think about Jordan and how the Pistons were just so vicious and unapologetically so, and he had to not only overcome it himself as an individual, but he had to galvanize the troops around him to do so. Horace Grant was younger. You know, B.J. Armstrong and John Paxson and Steve Kerr and all of these other guys. I mean, I'm just so Greg Hodges initially anyway. Let's not forget him and what he meant to that franchise. The list just goes on and on. I pay attention to that. When I think about how he had to go through the Knicks when Pat Riley came up in there, and Pat Riley like, this ain't Showtime no more. So guess what? I'm going to inherit a Ken Bannister, and then I'm going to go out and get an Anthony Mason, and I'm going to get him to join Charles Oakley. I had a Xavier McDaniels before that with Patrick Ewing, and found a John Starks, and traded for a Rolando Blackman, and got a Derek Harper, and had a Greg Anthony, and all of this stuff. I'm going to remember those kind of things. I'm going to remember what the league was like, how vicious it was, how violent it was, how it turned off the NBA so much that rules were implemented to make the game more attractive to the viewing eyes, not just nationally, but globally. I'm thinking about all of those things and how one year after another, as the game changed and supposedly the competition elevated, Jordan kept elevating. And by the way, the mentality that he had was at the very beginning. It wasn't something he developed after. He didn't have to sit across the table with Pat Riley showing him rings and Dwayne Wade saying, taking them on vacation and going like this. Yo, man, I need,
Stephen,
you're the best player in the world. But in order for us to be the best that we can be, I need to hand you the reins. Jordan didn't have to be told all of that.
Max, is this LeBron's hardest road to a chip?
Yeah, if he wins. I mean, like when KD joined the 73-win Warriors, that's impossible. So you could say that. But in terms of if he wins it, and you look at all the years that he won it, then I would say yes, because as a 7 seed, and by the way, don't lose the play-in, because then if you win the second play-in, you're an 8 seed. To go through the Western Conference, swimming with those sharks, coming off an injury, where your second banana is also coming off an injury, where Schroeder hasn't played in a while. Talk about guys who haven't played together recently. To get through the Western Conference and then wind up in the finals where I believe, health permitting, the big 3 on the Nets will be there, I would say yes. If he wins the chip this year, this will have been his hardest road to the finals.
I'd say the hardest road was last year because of the bubble. What they had to go through last year, with the season being halted, coming back with all the distractions. The Clippers were supposed to be there. Denver was formidable enough. And Portland had made a run, and they were just clicking on all cylinders when they went in, when they went into the playoffs after their bubble play because Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum was doing what they were doing. I would think that, I'm just saying, not necessarily in terms of just competition, but the fact that last year was the way that it was, with all the distractions and their continuity disrupted, et cetera, I view last year as the toughest.
You know what? I'd have to say that this year, I can't say that it would be the toughest. It would definitely rank up there. And kind of going on your point, Stephen A., last year and this year, it's been this weird kind of merge. They only had a few weeks off until this season kicked off. And we all know that it's way harder to defend a championship than win it the second time. And I think if you look back in the past, in every playoff situation, we've never really seen Bron with a nagging injury. The last time he had a serious injury, he was able pretty much to sit out the rest of the season with that growing, and the Lakers were able to get a decent pick, and he was able to get a little bit of rest. They haven't had any rest. They have continued to go, and we've seen that with the injuries to AD and Bron, and even with Schroeder being out due to unfortunate circumstances. They have so many challenges ahead of them. They're still trying to figure out what they're going to do as a team, identity-wise, how they're going to put wins together, and most importantly, how is Bron going to play with that nagging ankle injury, and how is AD going to handle being the number one scoring option and how he's going to adjust to defenses adjusting to him. So it'll be a very fascinating scenario for them. But I think definitely with lack of continuity, injuries, and really just a nonstop schedule that they've had since the bubble picked up last year, it will be a challenge.
One thing that keeps coming up, Molly and Stephen A. and Chris, that I will admit from our previous argument about the big three, whenever we point to a big three that might stumble, it's because of injury. And I'm treating injury like, well, that's just like an aberration, right? But really, it's a feature. If you concentrate a lot of resources in three players, then an injury to any one of them is a huge blow to you. So I have to acknowledge that. When I say it's all about the big three, provided health, maybe I can't just say provided health because there's always that risk. Everything you're talking about now with the Lakers, Chris, lack of continuity, short rest in the offseason, nagging injury with LeBron, same thing with AD, points to that. Points to concentration of resources in a couple of guys where now the possibility of an injury hurts you worse.
Well, I mean, if you're going all in, you got to go all in. And that's the thing with the big three structure. It's a bunch of different ways to try to construct a championship team. And yes, you're right. If you're going to put those resources in to three players, then you run the risk of that. I remember back in our first championship run, the year after losing to Dallas, we're trying to get back and hopefully excel at the mountaintop. I tore my groin, and LeBron and Dwayne were still able to hold it down as a duo. But we had great players. We had guys who were willing to step up. That was always our motto, next man up. And it takes a season of dedication, practice, and hard work and togetherness, really, to get your team to that point to where your bench guys can feel that they can rise to the occasion, make some things happen, even if you don't have one of your best players there. But, you have to be as close to 100% as possible to win a championship. And if you've got a big three, all three have to be healthy to win it.
No question. All right, let me spice this up real quick, fellas. Stephen A., I'm starting with you. Let's pretend that LeBron does win the championship with all these injuries he's dealt with in this difficult road. Does he finally catch MJ, in your opinion?
No. No. Listen, I'm going to say it again for the 1,000th time.
I'm going to keep asking.
LeBron will never exceed MJ in my eyes.
Okay.
Because I'm counting what I witnessed the first 8-9 years of his career. I'm taking all of that into consideration, and I'm not talking numbers. I'm talking an approach. I'm talking a mentality. I'm talking about there's a lot of things that I could pick apart that's just my taste in things. I think about an assassin and a killer's mentality, somebody that didn't come across as if they feared the moment ever. One of the things I call LeBron James the greatest small forward, even though he's really a point forward, like a point guard. He plays a small forward position. I call him a small forward, the greatest small forward in the history of basketball. I still wouldn't want him in the last 2 minutes over Larry Bird. See how it is? In other words, I know that he's better all around, but I'm rolling with Larry Bird in the last 2 minutes.
Stephen A., you, a couple weeks ago, sat here and went, if LeBron wins this year, I may have to consider. And I like that take better than this one, and I'll tell you why. I don't have religious devotion to Michael Jordan. And I think you do Jordan a disservice when you're like, no matter what LeBron does, it could never happen. Because to me, it's not about, it's MJ, I grew up watching that. It's rational. Jordan really is the greatest.